we are giving them a big, beautiful Christmas present in the form of a tremendous tax cut. It will be the biggest cut in the history of our country. It'll also be tax reform, and it'll create jobs.
President Donald Trump has made good on his Christmas promise to overhaul the country's tax system. It's also the Republican Party's first big legislative victory under Trump. Needless to say, they're savoring every moment.
Something this big, something this generational, something this profound could not have been done without exquisite presidential leadership. Mr. President, thank you for getting us over the finish line.
While Republicans rejoice, many others are expressing despair. Critics say the new U.S. tax code looks more like the Grinch who stole Christmas.
It's an all-out looting of America, the wholesale robbery of the middle class.
We are witnessing highway robbery in broad daylight and a looting of the federal treasury.
The Senate vote on a new tax code was split along party lines. U.S. Democrats were unanimous in their rejection of the bill. They say it gives too much to the rich and too little to everyone else. The new tax code amounts to a $1.5 trillion tax cut. Individuals and families will see a modest bump in savings for a few years. Wealthy Americans will get a rate reduction of nearly 3%. Most of the savings, however, will go to big corporations. Their rate is being slashed from 35% to 21%.
We advance the promise of opportunity every time we speak out on behalf of lower tax rates, freer markets, sound currencies.
The U.S. hasn't seen tax reforms like this since 1986. That was at the height of what many Republicans affectionately refer to as Reaganomics. Much like Trump's tax code reform, President Ronald Reagan gave massive tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy. Those policies arguably ushered in a new era of U.S. economic expansion.
This is Madonna, I'm a bodyguard.
But they also nearly tripled the U.S. national debt and left a contentious legacy on U.S. fiscal policy lasting until today. Many critics of the new Trump tax plan say it's on a similar debt trajectory. They say the bill was poorly designed with little thought and a lot of rush. How rushed? Ask Democratic Senator John Tester.
It's the night we're going to be voting on the tax bill. I just got the tax bill 25 minutes ago. This is the tax bill. See how thick it is?
Tester showed off many last-minute amendments to the bill, written by hand in the margins.
Can you tell me what that word is?
The speed at which this bill was pushed through Congress worries many critics, especially because it includes several non-tax related provisions with broad social implications. They range from allowing oil and gas drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to eliminating a key requirement of the Affordable Care Act. Americans will no longer be forced to buy health insurance, effectively gutting Obamacare. Altogether, this new bill will bring major changes across the U.S. The question is whether those changes will be positive, or whether, as critics say, they'll amount to getting a lump of coal right on time for Christmas. Basil Rahan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Washington by Andy Green. He's the Managing Director of Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. Also in Washington, we have Romina Boccia. She's the leading economist at the Heritage Foundation. And in Paris, we have TRT World's Editor-at-Large, Craig Kapitas, who's regularly featured on all of our programming, including Money Talk. Welcome to you all. First, Romina Boccia, now that Trump and the Republicans have managed to push this bill through, not without some help from you guys at the Heritage Fund, is there anything that you've seen in it now that you don't like?
Yes, I think that there were some missed opportunities in terms of closing more loopholes and deductions, but the bill certainly moves in the right direction. I'm very enthusiastic about the reduction in the corporate rate and full expensing, which will drive up economic growth and provide higher wages for workers, both of which were goals that the president set out when he was first campaigning. But there are quite a few expiration dates in the bill, so it will give lawmakers another opportunity to clean up the tax code even more, further simplify, and get rid of some of those special interest loopholes and deductions that they weren't able to get rid of in this round.
Andy Green in Washington sounds all good to me. Lower corporation tax, higher wages. What's there to complain about?
Well, if you're an American who has not seen their wages rise in a very long time in a meaningful way, who's seen their wealth collapse following the financial crisis of 2008 and the Great Recession, who continues to face unemployment challenges or other challenges with just making ends meet, this bill does little to nothing for them, little to nothing for you, but provides millions and billions of dollars to the very wealthiest and very largest corporations. So if you think those are the right priorities for America, then you should love this bill.
Ramina, you're shaking your head. Let me come back to you and come in on that before we go to Craig in Paris.
You know, we've been hearing these false talking points for months now, and the American people will soon realize that they are just false talking points, because this bill provides tax cuts for virtually all middle-class and lower-income Americans, and many corporations have already announced, including AT&T and Comcast just this morning, that once the tax bill goes through, the first thing they will do is provide $1,000 bonuses to their workers. So workers will see the benefits from this tax bill right away. They will see a reduction in their payroll taxes as soon as February or March of next year. And they will also see higher wages over the next decade as additional investment in the United States for making America more competitive again with this tax bill will create more demand for U.S. workers, and that will drive up their wages in the long run.
So Craig in Paris, Ramina, the Republican, likes it. Of course, Andy Green, the Democrat, doesn't. You're an American in Paris with a bit of cash in your pocket. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that this tax bill proves that Donald Trump believes he can make America great again by monetizing everything. He's run this campaign like he would one of his game shows on TV. Come on down, we're going to give you money. And now the Republicans are going to run out and try and sell this bill between now and the midterm elections. And they might well be able to do it. You have to remember something. American politicians have one goal in life, and that is to be reelected, unless they either retire for reasons of health or are pushed out now on sexual misconduct allegations. So this gives them something to run on. And it does not inconvenience Americans. They're going to have some money in their pocket. It might not be long-term, but Americans think in quarters, whereas Chinese and other countries think in tranches of 50 to 100 years. Trickle-down works very well for the short term.
Andy, trickle-down works for the short term. Are you in agreement with that? And what changes would you have made to this bill? Because you can accept that the American tax code was arcane and needed some kind of reform.
Well, you know, let's set the record straight on a couple of things. First of all, there's not much reform in this. There's just a lot of cuts for the folks at the very top and tiny, tiny crumbs for ordinary Americans. You know, my colleague from the Heritage Foundation pointed out that everybody gets a little tax cut. That's true in 2018, but let me tell you how much you get. If you make $20,000 to $30,000 a year, you get on average $180. If you make $50,000 to $75,000, you get about $870. Those are good things. But what if you make $500,000 to $1 million? $500,000 to $1 million, you get $20,000. $1 million plus, $60,000. If you are in the top 0.1%, you're going to get $193,000 just in 2018 from this tax cut. And what's more, it doesn't create jobs at all. Those numbers about wages being increased really have a lot more to do with monopoly and the application of one particular company seeking to buy another company and further create monopoly in our economy. And so handing out wages to make nice with Donald Trump and his antitrust regulators is frankly quite concerning. The good news is that democracy exists in America. This bill is extraordinarily unpopular. Politicians are salivating around the country to run against this bill. And we've already seen a credible victory in Alabama by a Democrat, Doug Jones, where Democrats have not won at all, and the Democrats are, running against this bill nationally, are holding a strong lead against the average Republican. So, this bill, folks will have to run on it. And I guess one more point I'd make is that the history of these tax cuts don't create jobs at all. They hand money back to shareholders via buybacks. There's already been $80 billion in buybacks associated with just the passage of this bill. That money's not going to go to shareholders. It's not going to go to raise wages. It's going to further concentrate economic power among those who already have it, ice out small business, and leave workers scratching for crumbs.
Ramina, you were shaking your head there, but I'll not have you delve into the weeds of some of those details coming from Andy. But one thing I do want you to pick up on, during 8 years of the Obama administration, all we heard from Senate Republicans was debt and the deficit and how we can't spend any more money. Now, all estimates say that this is going to explode the debt, $1.5 trillion. What's happened to those deficit hawks?
I think explode the debt is an exaggeration, because our national debt, it is at $20 trillion, but it's not driven by too little tax revenue. It's clearly driven by too much spending. And just to put this in perspective, that $1.5 trillion is less than a 2 to 3% reduction in overall projected revenues over the next decade. And what we also find is that once you account for the economic growth effects, that $1.5 trillion shrinks significantly. By better, more accurate estimates show that it'll be closer to $700 billion to perhaps $1 trillion. But even that doesn't account for the fact that as you lower tax rates, you do provide greater incentives for investment, for additional work that will drive up revenues. There's certainly some improvements that could be made to make this bill even more pro-growth, and I hope that lawmakers will take another crack at those provisions. That means closing more loopholes and deductions, making sure that businesses can write off the full cost of their investment, not just over the next 5 years, but permanently. Those are the kinds of pro-growth changes that will ultimately help American workers. And we don't need to look very far. We just need to look at Germany and Canada and pretty much all of our trading partners that have reduced their corporate rates. The worldwide average is only about 23%. The US rate will be set at 21%, but we also have state and local rates. So the total will be more like 25%, 26%, but we're much more close to the worldwide average, and that means America will be more competitive again, and that means more foreign direct investment and more business activity in the United States, and that will drive up wages for workers. It's happened in Germany, it's happened in Canada. In fact, workers bear the brunt of the cost from corporate taxes. They collect it at the corporate level, but it's ultimately workers who bear the pain.
Okay, Craig, we've had two economists arguing, throwing out lots of numbers. What's Joe Sixpack in Pennsylvania going to think about all those numbers? And is he going to really care about debt or deficit if he sees a bit of extra cash in his pocket at the end of the month?
Yeah, it might only be $180, but you know what? It's better than a poke in the eye, and he didn't have it before. And if there's promises of more money coming, he's going to like this tax bill even better. Look, this is a cavalcade of numbing numbers that few people outside the policy wonk community actually pay any attention to. This bill will be sold to the American public or not sold to the American public by the politicians. Now, we've heard a lot of numbers, and believe me, this bill is full of all kinds of numbers. However, the most significant number in this bill, as I see it, has to do with how much money certain groups are getting back. According to this tax plan, there are going to be $70 billion in cuts benefiting foreigners, foreign corporations who own stock in U.S. companies. That's a substantial amount of money. The number of cuts that are going to be benefiting middle-income people, 23 billion. That is really skewed, and I think that the long-term sustainability of this bill would be better if those two numbers could have been turned around, and that 70 billion in cuts was going to middle-class Americans who need the money more than a bunch of foreign corporations.
Absolutely. Okay, Craig, we've run out of time, but just a final thought for all of you to leave you with. It'd be interesting to know what the president's going to gain from this, but of course he still hasn't released his tax returns. Romina Boccia from the Heritage Foundation, Craig Capiters in Paris, and Andy Green from the Centre for American Progress. Thanks for joining us.